Welcome to Made in Science, the official podcast of the University of Stuttgart. My name is Wolfgang Holtkamp. I'm Senior Advisor on International Affairs at the university and your host for today. In this episode, we welcome Dr. Annette Finz, who is business consultant and founder of the Institut für Sinnorientierte Beratung, the Institute for Purpose-Orientated Consulting, and also the author of several books on coaching and leadership. Dr. Finz studied philosophy and psychology at the University of Stuttgart, which was a fundamental stepping stone for creating her philosophical approach to consulting enterprises. She lives in Germany and Switzerland, and today she's our guest. Hello, Annette.
Hello, Wolfgang. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome, and we are very glad to get a chance to talk about enterprises, responsibility, purpose, meaningful decisions, all of that. However, I'd like to start with one of your life mottos, I guess, which is life is serious, therefore we need a lot of humor. How did that motto come about for you? And do you always use it when you work with people and giving them advice?
Well, for myself, I really use it, I guess, every day, at least 3 times, probably. And humor is a very good tool, I would say, to have a distance to your own situations. So that helps really a lot. And so I try to, not to convince, but to take over somehow some situations with my clients, to get them laughing at them. If you want to know when I really decided to do that, it was in the Philippines when I was working there in Manila in the 1980s. And these times, probably today still, it was a very dirty city, and you were really, you had a certain surface of black on your skin when you came home. And so you urgently needed a shower. And I went under the shower, and the water came out, and I took the soap on the skin. And when I wanted to get rid of the soap again, there was no water running. And I was sure there wasn't any water running for the next hour or something. So I had such a hard day. And after that, I was close to my tears. And I realized that I now have the decision whether I would really laugh about the situation. Because, bad experiences, good stories. Or just break out in tears. And I was sure that my day would be better if I would laugh about it. And so it was. And I was somehow sitting on the chair and just laughing about it, wrapped in my towels. And there I really made the decision that this would be a good idea always, if you're really in such a situation, to do that. That doesn't mean that you take the situation seriously. Well, in this case, it was, you won't die because of that or anything, but it's just you start keeping water aside for such situations, for example.
When you share that story, perhaps with your clients, as you did with our audience here today, do you get a reaction when people are surprised, saying, well, we cannot make the connection between a consultancy and humor and today's problems or the issues that the respective companies have at the moment? And I'd like to extend just one more aspect to this. Have you found that even more humor is needed in your consulted work today when you meet enterprises?
I don't think that it's that we need more, but that we need it on the from time to time by exaggerating situations, or the engineers would say extrapolieren. You extrapolate the situation to an observed standard, and then you see that probably it won't come to that standard or to that absurd situation. But that makes you laugh, and that makes it. It's just in a certain sense, it's more or less a psychological thing that it makes you easier, not and you need that ease to approach the problems you have at the moment. So that's the situation. In earlier times, it was sometimes more or less irony you could take, because sometimes if you take yourself too seriously, or your role in the company, if someone's told me, I cannot afford to leave the company for 3 weeks of vacation, I said, yes, that's true. If you die right away within 3 weeks, all people will be unemployed. The clients won't get any product, and probably your town will be, and it's so that made people laugh about themselves and about just imagination, what could happen, and then they sometimes take themselves a little bit back to have the right relationship to their own people, to their clients, to their work. So that was the irony. In today's problem, irony is perhaps sometimes what we would call in German Galgenhumor.
Some sense of dark humor.
Yes.
Now already you have drawn the line between humor, but also the purpose that your work is so much about. In 2020, you wrote an article for Süddeutsche Zeitung in which you stress the importance of finding purpose in work, especially in moments of crisis. Looking back at the 2 years that we have just gone through, what has come into existence since then? Would you still write the same article, or write the article in the same way 2 summers later?
In this case, I probably would. Normally, you wouldn't after 2 years, but it was this stressing the point that in times of crisis, and we're going even deeper in the crisis, which I didn't think 2 years ago. There was more the sense of a crisis 2 years ago. People felt fearful. My clients felt fearful, myself as well. But today we're really in an economic crisis, in a real hard economic crisis. We're going into it, and in this case, you really need orientation. Because without orientation in a crisis, you're just walking there and just you take the next way you could take there without any orientation. It's just like without a compass in a forest, and you're lost. And purpose is this orientation, and you need it. So even if you're not on the way you want it to be, if it's still the right direction, it's fine. It's not great, but it's fine. And purpose is not having many things, but it's just it's focusing on what you really, really want. And that's the real thing at the moment. You really need that. Yeah.
The challenge for people, and perhaps especially those who are in leadership positions, may also be to accept the capacity to reinvent themselves in order to address a particular situation. Do you think the capacity of reinventing oneself is a basic function that people have, or does it need a lot of training and recognition to actually make it happen so that a new purpose can also be found?
If you have a purpose that makes you inventive, I would say, because if this way doesn't work, you take another one. So because you know why you do that, What for? So that's the main thing in purpose in business, that it makes you stronger to follow not that one path, but the direction. So it makes you inventive. In Germany and in Switzerland, well, let's say in middle of Europe and Northern Europe, we're not really used to reinvent ourselves. I mean, as a philosopher, as a sociologist, perhaps you are, because you're forced to, because our studies don't lead you to a real profession right away. But normally, especially my clients who are mostly engineers or managers, they are not used to that. They are used that things come to them, or they get a recipe, do that way, and then it works. And that's lost. So that's why it needs philosophy at the moment. I think everybody has this capacity. It's dependent perhaps on a certain psychological question of your how stable you are inside, because it's always very strenuous. But we always, I mean, so many managers say that they love challenges. Now it's the right time to love challenges, because a challenge is when you don't know whether it will work in a good way or not. Otherwise, it's not a real challenge. And it's like a muscle. I think reinventing oneself or just being stable in these situations, being inventive, is like a muscle. You have to train it. And I think we got some training with Corona, some very good training. And now we need that training to go on. It's a strenuous way for many of them, but you realize, I think it's, well, I hope I won't be beaten by anybody, but I think it's good that we had this Corona time, because it really made us ready for what is coming up at the moment. Yeah.
To bring it to a practical example, I guess, one of the challenges that we all saw in the last years is also an understanding that the digital transformation is a big topic that needs to be addressed at a different pace, at a faster pace than before. Now, when it comes to the digital transformation and enterprises, how well are they prepared for this? How do you advise them about proceeding to implement an understanding for this transformation in the enterprises as well? Please, could you elaborate on that particular example from your work experience a little more?
Well, I think it cannot be underestimated what the digitalization will do or will change in our businesses, and it is underestimated by many, even managers. And especially with the employees who are more or less afraid of the digitalization. And that's my topic then. On the first side, to ask the CEOs, where do you want to start, and why do you want the digitalization? Because mostly people don't even know what it really means. I mean, going around with a mobile device doesn't make you a digital person, but that's still, there are still some managers who say, well, I am digitalized. We have a company app, for example. That's fine. That's one step. And then I ask, well, how many people are using that app? And it's just the top management, perhaps, because they find it somehow, sexy to use it. For example, the shift is changing, and they still, the leaders still announce that via WhatsApp, because they know that all of the employees will read this WhatsApp, but they won't read the app. So that's one of the problems, that people are not ready because they don't know enough about it. In that app story, for example, the employees just were in fear that they were somehow that was a sort of espionage about their life and so on. But this is just a symptom, because digitalization needs a lot of trust and a lot of questioning the purpose. What is this company about, and what is it for, and what does they do? And then when is digitalization? When does it make sense?
In walking that way of change that is necessary, or that a company decides to go, communication plays a very important role, and you have already hinted at that just a moment ago. I wonder, what kind of storyline is it that you recommend for companies to use to exactly sort of explain what something new, an app, whatever it may be, is all about, and in order to address the issue both for the company and that means for the employees in particular? Well,
that's what I would call the purpose trace, die Sinnspur. The older a company is, the higher the problem is, of course. Because if you have a lot of tradition, it's always problematic to go very new ways, and you have people who are with a company since 30 years, 40 years, and they're used to, that's their company in a certain sense. And that's the chance, because it's their company, and you can ask them how was it to work 40 years ago? Because there was always a change, and there was always this certain purpose trace right from the beginning, when it's 125 years old or 100 years around. And in Germany, we tend to have a lot of companies which were found in between the two wars or right after the war, the Second War. So they are fairly old, they're fairly traditional, which is a strength. And they have a certain identity which they didn't really reflect yet, because they were always doing. And I mean, there is nearly no company which still produces the same things they did in 1948. So that's a good chance to tell them, well, this company, innovation is tradition in a certain sense. So that's why you are here, because you always changed, but you didn't really realize it. But now there's a real change, and just think about the founder. And so that's how I really create a purpose trace, which is called storyline. Yeah.
Let's talk about your student life here in Stuttgart. In the 1990s, you studied philosophy and psychology at the time, and then later went on to study pedagogics and sociology at the University of Konstanz. Why would Stuttgart be the university of choice for philosophy and psychology? Why was it at the time?
Well, to be honest, it was. If I would have had the free choice, I probably wouldn't have gone to Stuttgart. But today, I'm very happy that I went there. So there are many great universities for philosophy, for example, Tübingen or something, which is very close. So, but my husband was just doing his PhD in Stuttgart, and we were already married. So I didn't want to live apart. And so I just chose Stuttgart to be my alma mater. And that was just really, really great, because I have a certain way. I was already 28 that day, or 29. And for me, it was then easy to, because I knew the University of Stuttgart, which is a great campus, but it's different to all the campuses you have with people who are studying philosophy in other universities, because it's so technical driven. And that makes the people studying philosophy or sociology and so on, that's a small group, and they know each other. And that was just wonderful, because it was so, we just built groups ourselves to study certain topics we were interested in. We really knew our professor, and he was, it was just more or less, it was a group. We were studying together, even with the professors and the lecturers. That was really great. So that was a very personal thing. And because we were such a small group with this huge amount of engineers around, we were surrounded by engineers. That made us, on one hand, a special group, which is always a good feeling. And on the other hand, we faced a lot of other students we were befriended with, and learned about how it is to study electronic engineering, for example. Yeah, how is it to study that? And that's so different. It's so different, and it really makes you understand how business, or later on companies, are, what kind of people are in there. How do they think about it? If I would have been married to a philosopher, I at least dream of that he would say, "Oh, in this dress you look like a blossom in spring," And my husband just said, "Oh, with that dress, that's an optical upgrade." So that's different, and it's just for as a present for my birthday, I got a certain. I was clapping, and then the light was on, and I was clapping, and then it didn't go off, but it should. Just very, very different things than you would experience. In a university, you just would have surrounded by philosophers, psychologists, sociologists, and that's really an advantage, I think, a real advantage. So I'm really fond of University of Stuttgart. I really am.
As you recall it, were the questions of responsibility and leadership in your studies of philosophy already? Big topics, responsible topics, were they covered at all? Or was it you yourself who found your way into these topics and developed them further?
I think both of it. My own vita was leading to that questions, and that was why I was studying philosophy even at that age, or I started. Because those big questions of responsibility, of freedom, of justice, those are the big questions which are always throughout the centuries a question of philosophy, of course, as well. And philosophy helps you to analyze, not to feel all those questions, but really to analyze them in a very, very structured and logic way. And logic is a very important subject in philosophy. So that makes it very near to mathematics. And it's really important to analyze your question. What do you think? What is justice? What does it mean? And are there different ways to interpret it? So that's today really important if we talk about in this energy crisis. how should we distribute energy, for example? What is the right way to do that? So it comes to a very practical way. And if we are just discussing about it without any background, that makes it more or less emotional and it doesn't lead us to a good way.
Is that the question? And is that leading in the direction of explaining the difference between philosophy and ethics?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, because ethics would more or less be to reflect that, but not to tell people what they should do. I mean, that's sometimes people think I go into the companies and tell them what they should do to be good people, or a good company. And that's not right. I just help them to have a certain pattern how they could think about these basic questions, and to be honest about these basic questions, and to prevent them to make decisions which could cause some problems tomorrow, because it was more a feeling, and engineers are really feeling people. I mean, they're more or less very, very emotional people, I would say. They often don't admit that, but in concern of those very important topics, we're not taught to think in patterns, and to think to the very end. And that's mostly very important, to think, what if I just extrapolate this way, where will it end? And in moral questions, we seldom do think about that.
To frame it even on another level, in your next step of your education, you decided to become a logotherapist. Please, can you explain what a logotherapist focuses on?
Logotherapy was founded by Viktor Frankl, who is especially famous in the US, which is amazing, in Vienna in the 1920s. And it is based on the idea that people who follow a purpose are much more stronger to withstand any problems. So that was very important in the 20s, at the end of the 20s, with unemployed people. And for Viktor Frankl, it was important because he was a Jew, and he went into the concentration camp in 1942. And just to realize for himself that because he had a purpose to survive, it's not the reason why someone survives, but you're more stable to withstand many problems. And so that's how he became famous after war, even. And it means logo is just logos. That's the Greek word for word, but also for meaning. So he founded the meaning-centered therapy. So, and that was very attractive to me, because the meaning in life, but purpose in business, was always something which was attracting me in my life very early. So I was really fond of that idea. So I went there for 4 years. It was I think 50 weekends. So. And in these days, I decided not to follow the therapist way, but to go into the business coaching. Yeah.
I have already mentioned that you are the author of several books. Now, looking at the title of the books, I assume that there is a certain relation between these different publications. They are about advice. Then there is leadership addressed. Then purpose plays a role. Did this all come step by step? Did you develop your theory of addressing situations as you were experiencing the business life and relating it to your studies, to your theories gradually. What can be the link between the books, and then how far do they build up on each other?
Mostly the topics come to me in a certain sense. I had a real certain theory about how I wanted to advise, doing my advice, and I just started in 1998. Experiencing that purpose was really a difficult word at that time. People found that was metaphysic, or they wondered what kind of person I am. But I'm glad today that I stick to it and I stayed there. But it was more or less the process of advising, the process of consulting, accompanying, realizing what is working and what's not working, which stabilized, in some sense, the theory, and which was, I wouldn't say changing, but developing the whole thing. So today I'm fairly deep in this topic, of course, and but it's very practical. And when I started philosophy, I started with knowing that I would like to work with people. So I always wondered what I was just reading could have to do with the just normal life outside. And that was Stuttgart very, very good for me because life was always outside. And it's this twist between theory and practice, which is a wonderful experience. And today I'm more and more on this way of I'm more convinced that to have a narrative or this purpose trace is perhaps the most important thing, and that's why I'm working more and more about that at the moment. Yeah.
Annette, let's look ahead a little bit, and let's try to find out what needs to be done. What could be some of the changes in companies, but perhaps also in training and education to make people more suited, more fit, more ready for our times, especially in this decade that sees so many new tasks for people, and how do we get the tools to address them properly and to keep the balance between work and life. So what's up at the moment? What is on your desk as we are talking? What is it that you would like to offer to the companies as courses? Perhaps what are some of the course titles that you come up with in your program?
Well, concerning the future, I mean, there is Karl Valentin, a humorist, who said prognoses are really difficult, especially when they are concerning the future, you know. And perhaps that was not so true like today. Perhaps in his days, in the 20s, it was also. But that's the thing for the future, especially. One of my seminars was communication in the storm, which is one task at the moment very important because we don't know, and we don't know about we don't have a weather forecast really. So we are somehow in a storm. That's a seminar which was attended fairly well or booked fairly well. The other thing is surely the digitalization. And the third thing is this leading without really knowing what is coming next. And that's probably the core competence you now need, which is especially for people who are always very they're always calculating. People who are always calculating, and those are our leaders in companies. They're really not used to that, and they hate that situation. And my task, in a certain sense, is to make them love this situation, because it's more or less their opportunity to make a difference. So it's more the personality, the attitude, the relying on your intuition. Just to have this combination between intuition and analysis, and to combine that and then make a decision in the direction of purpose. That's my, I would say at the moment, the main work I do with my clients. And that's what is really needed at that moment. I'm very sure about that, because in a certain sense, many employees are in fear what is coming up to them, but you really can scale that, because the companies know it they don't know it themselves. I mean, it's very so they really need to have a balance between. Machiavelli calls it going between the villages and the mountain, going on the mountain, just to feel what people feel in the villages, to see there more or less, from the mountain view, it's a small problem in the village. But if you're living in the village, it's a big problem. So you have to feel that, but you have to go on the mountain to have an overview. How many villages do you have? Where is it burning? And perhaps sometimes, and that's very difficult, you have to let it burn down, because it's more important to care for another problem. And that's something which is a hard decision. And that's where really many leaders are happy to have someone on their side to talk to about that, or to ask questions, to analyze it, to have a certain guide or guidance, not a certain guidance on that way.
How does this affect education on a broader level? Should education in school, certainly perhaps at universities, be more attentive towards these issues as well? What you described as, we don't know exactly what is for sure happening in the future. Therefore, what kind of strategies need to be taught to today's students to be perhaps even better prepared for years that will fill their professional life when the situations are not as structured, not as clearly visible as perhaps they used to be?
Well, in my opinion, philosophy would be really very important even at school. I went to a school where physics and mathematics were the really main topics. And it's a pity if you talk to engineers, managers, and you talk a little bit about, what Aristotle thought about justice and how he analyzed it and how he did that and how it could help today. They're really very happy about that. They're really, wow, that's an idea. It's a pity that I didn't think about it that way much earlier. I think this misunderstanding that philosophy is mostly ethics sometimes makes people a little, I don't want to live a moral life every day, and I don't want to think about that every day, and it's boring. It's just on that very high level, perhaps sometimes. And that would be really very good to have that as a subject to think about. And I taught, it was from Airbus in Hamburg some years ago. I had several lectures there in Hamburg for a female, and it was a female engineering program. And we had philosophy. I taught philosophy there. And it was always not only fun, but it was somehow very enlightening for them. It's training how to think. It's training how to analyze not just a technical problem, but to analyze your whole thing where you're in. So that really helps. It's not always funny because it makes you see perhaps a little more, but it's very helpful. And then to search the main roads, see all these things about, and then see the main roads which are important to your life, to your company, and so on.
Annette, next we have 7 very brief questions that we would like to ask you. Please answer as shortly as possible. We call this moment 7. And here's our first moment. Spätzle or Maultaschen?
Maultaschen.
Moment 2. One thing you could change about the world.
I would love if every person would change his perspective from time to time to think about how it is to be another person.
Moment 3. Do you have a movie recommendation for us?
I love to watch Deutschland 83, 86, 89. It's a series about the changing in the DDR and West Germany.
Moment 4. The best advice you have ever received.
It's follow your path, but don't always look on your path.
Moment 5. Your favorite place on campus at the University of Stuttgart was?
This little pond in front of the library, right in the middle of Stuttgart, between this K1 and K2. Yeah.
Moment 6. Please finish the following sentence. If I could start all over again, I would do the following differently.
Believing in myself earlier.
And moment 7. Please complete the following sentence. Thanks to my studies, I know that...
It's the person who makes the difference.
Thank you, Annette, for our conversation, for all the differences that you make people aware of in themselves, in their work surroundings, let's hope, and in shaping the future as well. We wish you the very, very best for the upcoming projects, especially in these particular times. And to everyone, please stay healthy, stay good, and stay tuned for our conversations that are always based on what is made in science.